Folks, welcome to the first panel of the Film and Comic Con Glasgow on Sunday. Our first guest, one of our cosplay guests, is lovely Sarah Genosius. Did I pronounce that correctly? Okay. First of all, what was can you remember exactly what the kind of point was when you decided that this is the kind of world you wanted to get into? Was it a certain movie or a cartoon series or anything like that kind of made you decide that this is what I want to do, this is what I want to get into?
Well, I've always sort of liked dressing up ever since I was a child, but with being on the internet, I saw like larger events such as like Anime Expo in America. People put like lots of time and effort into the creation of their own cosplays. And so in 2013, the very first NC in Scotland, I went along and cosplayed for the first time as Happy Suzumiya from Suzumiya Happy Jiu-Jitsu. And classic 13-year-old cosplay, no wig, no makeup, and it just sort of developed from there.
So when did you decide to kind of venture more into the prop side of things? A lot of cosplayers, they kind of like the design elements of the costume, pick up very good sword skills, etc., etc. What made you kind of decide to get into the more hardware side of things?
Shortly after I started cosplaying, a year after, I wanted to just try making props because I saw other people putting lots of skills and things. I've always been a bit of an arty kid. So I used to originally just use stuff I could find around the house. Like I used cardboard from boxes of cat food and PVA glue and made like little fans and hats and things like that. And then it was only much later in 2019 that I ventured into 3D modeling and then 3D printing, how all of these are made.
Some of the examples you've got on stage, and there's also more examples right on our table. For instance, what's the kind of design process when you start doing like one of these ones here?
So, with the magnet, I made this actually especially as an example for this panel. Because it's a simple shape. I originally actually had a full workflow of how I created a 3D model. But an important thing to sort of remember, because I designed for 3D printing, I don't want too much wastage. I also want to minimize the sort of general cost because just rather the electricity from running the 3D printer has a cost associated. So I've got here as well how I slice the model into different sections to minimize those costs. So rather than printing it as a solid piece, which it also has details on both sides, and printing double-sided details can be really tricky, I split it in half and then hollowed it out. So it actually assembles that it's got an outer surface for the outer wall, surface for the inner wall, and then a lid, which just sort of printed flat like that. And then those are put together. And obviously with a bit of glue and pins, that's half scale model. It doesn't have my correct alignment because it produces half a magnet but with considerably less material use. And it also reduces the overall weight, which makes bigger props such as the staff behind me a lot more manageable to take into an event.
The likes of the dagger here you've got as well as an example. How do you go about that? Is it like a multi-layer process? You've got to design each part of the blade?
Because I got an older 3D printer, I can't do multicolored prints. So this is actually designed that each of these colors are individual separate pieces. And this is another method of aligning pieces together. With the magnet, I use little 2mm pins to make sure all pieces are aligned. But in this, the actual alignment is inbuilt in the design itself. It's almost like the handle forms a sort of puzzle in a way. I've got an image at my table which shows the individual pieces before assembly, and they just slot it together and glue them for security and it holds it together. To show an example of how it's attached to the blade, I've actually not been destroyed. And you can see it does have a small square pin which allows it to align and rotate or anything like that. If you want rotation in a prop, you have to make sure you've got a sort of offset between the two drawing faces, otherwise it can be either too tight, very difficult to get the two pieces together and not rotate, or it's too much of a gap, it will be too loose and be sort of wobbly.
Alright, and what's the design this piece here?
For the plate, this was a more complicated prop, first because it's got details on both the core surfaces, but also because I wanted this extra little accessory to be magnetic. Now, some people do insert the magnets midway through printing by pausing the print. I didn't want to do that. Also, like the magnet wanted to save material. So this plate is actually hollow. The front and back surfaces are two separate pieces, and the internal slope, external slope, and top surface, as well as each of these 6 detail pieces on the edges, are all separate individual printed pieces. Like with the dagger, I've got a picture on my table showing how that looked before assembly. But this means that this is very light, and I was able to, on the inside, put a magnet which is quite sturdy, it doesn't come off.
What would you say has been the easiest piece that you've put together for yourself, and what has been the most challenging?
Some pieces are quite straightforward, like this badge, where yes, the modelling was a bit more complicated. It's got a lot of surface details. But then when it actually comes to assembly, this is just simply 2 pieces with 3 little lining pins and gluing together, a couple of things on the back and the set. But any of the sort of like larger props such as weapons and bigger accessories like that, because I'm taking into account how to produce them efficiently with the wastage as light as possible, because I'm logging in about convention for 8 hours, those tend to be more of a challenge. I might even have like several iterations of the model before I have a design that I'm finally happy with, which I finally print.
Do you think you have a lot of trial and error there when you're making such the larger pieces?
Sometimes, usually just with practice, by the time it gets to the stage I actually physically print it, it's pretty spot on. But digitally, when I'm still designing it I actually use CAD software for all of these, Autodesk Fusion. There'll be like a lot of iterations, a lot of versions, just to like tweak little things. The main trial and error I have is that I'm using new material. Most of these props are printed in ABS with all of the gold sections, these particularly shiny gold sections, not the gold on the star, are printed using silk PLA, which is a different type of plastic filament. I mean, use FDM filament printing. It has a more sort of elastic property to it, and because with 3D printing the nozzle is very, very narrow, it's like 0.2 millimeters per nozzle, it is a risk that it can sort of clog up with the filament. And because the silk PLA is more elastic, I had many hours of troubleshooting when I was first printing it because it just kept clogging the nozzle. Eventually enough settings were adjusted and things, I managed to get it to work. But that was definitely a sort of big trial and error that I had.
Anyone got a question for our guest here? Yeah, there you go. Would you like it, Mike? We do have Scott there with the mic.
What's been like your favourite piece that you've made so far?
I'd say my favorite piece, I don't have it with me here, but at my table I've got a cane. And I just like that because I incorporated other elements to it. Like it's got actually like metal chains over it. I used sort of loop clasps to attach that chain, and I just like incorporating other hardware. That's one thing that I find really good about modeling in Autodesk Fusion. If you are working to like standard threads, like if you want something to be fitted with an M3 bolt, you are just able to set it that it creates the equivalent side to the nut part of the bolt, nut and bolt system, and you can 3D print that straight away. You don't even have to tap a hole or anything like that. It just works. So I use that for the cane that I have on the table.
So what was the design process like when you're doing this staff? Because obviously it's quite lengthy, so do you have to connect it? Is it just the headpiece when you're connecting? Just like
I'll stand up for this one because it's quite a bit crop. So with this, I did not print the sort of rod part. That's just a painted PVC pipe that reduces weight, and also one slight disadvantage with 3D printing is the fact that it has a weakness along the layers than it prints. So if I printed a rod this big vertically, it would actually be quite big and risk breaking just because of the much smaller surface area for each of the layers. But in order to put this together, I created inserts for this PVC pipe. The bottom one is threaded, and that's so this is attached without glue, this end piece. It's just threaded on, and it's very solid, and you don't have to worry about stuffing it on the floor or anything. And the top piece, it was actually too large to fit in my 3D printer. So underneath this ribbon, I actually split this crescent shape and had to print it in multiple separate pieces, and it's got a seam line along the middle, so it looks good all around. And then I glued that all together. This is made from ABS. Using ABS, because there's an interesting thing you can do with ABS. It dissolves in acetone, which is basically nail polish remover. So you can create a sort of slurry, which can act as its own adhesive. It's proper term would be solvent welding, but so I solvent welded this all together, and each of these pieces were modeled and printed separately, and these little pins I did print vertically because they're smaller, not under any stress like if I'm shaking this around. These were fine to hold in this centerpiece. And for transportation, this top piece is completely removable.
Yeah, it's always handy if you can break down the larger items and don't have to carry them all in one piece. I wrote the ones you brought with you, not only these ones, I do know you have some on your desk as well. What's been your favourite out of the lot that you've got with you? Or what one did you think most rewarding once you got it done?
Most rewarding, I'd probably find the plate because it was had quite a lot more surface detail to a lot of things I worked on, and although I've incorporated magnets in the past into props, it's usually been more like flat surface on flat surface sort of thing, rather than that item at the back of the plate. Right. Don't drop the stuff. It's actually on a curved surface, so I had to do quite a bit of research into magnet strengths in order to make sure that even though there is both material underneath, because you can't see the magnet there, and the material here, can't see the magnet here, that it is strong enough that when I was holding it, when cosplaying as a character, that it wouldn't fall off, it wouldn't risk falling on the floor, breaking, or anything like that. So I found this the most rewarding. And I also did a bit of hand painting with a very nice detail on the front.
What advice do you give to people who are maybe wanting to get started, firstly cosplay in general, and then if they say that they kind of want to get more into the prop scene rather than going full cosplay, they want to kind of focus on making props, what kind of advice would you give to either or?
Don't worry about mistakes because they happen. I mean, I've mentioned how many hours troubleshooting and just printing a new material. And also, don't feel that you have to have expensive equipment to start prop making. Like, yes, I've got a 3D printer. I've got two 3D printers, in fact, both Razer and FDM. But I have made, in the past, just out of cardboard, swords. They look great, and people have made props which are like absolute works of art out of EVA foam and things like that. So yeah, you don't need technology to be able to make good props, but you need experience and skills in those kind of time.
And what about the just beginning cosplay? Those who want to kind of take the first steps, but they're not sure how to do it.
Pick a character or franchise that you're very passionate about, because the most important thing in cosplay is that you have fun. You enjoy being the character, and as for advice, where to get started, there's a lot of resources online. You don't have to make your first cosplay completely from scratch. You look around, maybe a second-hand someone selling a cosplay that of the character you really want to be, and it's like work in little steps.
Any more questions from
Is there a prop that you'd like to make in the future, maybe a bigger project that you'd want to try and attempt at some point?
the gas rifle from Fallout. I've been eyeing it up since I was a kid, since Fallout 4 came out. That's the sort of prop I feel just because of the scale of it. I'm going to have to use a combination of for the light, what I feel is the best result for me. Combination of 3D printing for all the sort of like battery cells and things, but for the bulk base of it, the bulk of it, I would probably make that out of EVA foam to reduce weight and be a bit cheaper because printing very large props can add up.
Alright, any more questions from the guys here? No? Not yet? Alright. So, what do you have in the future? Do you have any projects that you're kind of currently working on, props wise or even costume wise?
Something that's been a bit of a back burner for a while has been I've been wanting to cosplay as Byleth from Fire Emblem Three Houses. I'd say it's probably about 90% done. I've made her fancy big glowy sword, I've made all the armor. It's just a matter of the last bits of sewing. I had to sew an academic gown, which is a bit of a challenge to pattern, but I'm getting there.
You got any kind of props lined up in the future? Is there any, you got any props to go with that particular costume?
Yeah, I made the sword, which was the sword of the creator. I did a different approach for that. I wanted to try working, because she's from a video game, I was able to get the actual in-game model of the sword. I wanted to see what it would be like if I modified a model from a video game. Because I wanted to put in channels for lighting and electronics. I ended up completely remodeling the hilt and handle to make space for a battery and voltage regulator board and things like that. However, when it came to painting, I had figured out a few tricky things that can crop up when you're using models from video games. In order for the games to actually perform well, on the hardware, the models tend to be almost like simplified. They have a lower poly count, simpler geometry. And it doesn't look like that in the game because they use fancy shaders and lighting effects to make it look smoother. But when you are actually going to 3D print the model, all that angular, lower polygon geometry shows through. And no matter how much I sanded that, I was not fully able to get the reverse detail, that defect in a way. So that's one thing to take care of, depending on the video game, that if it were to go that route rather than making your own 3D model from scratch, that could happen in the less of a problem if you use do foam work. I did that same method for armor and it was fine because foam is a lot more flexible and stuff like that.
So do you have any personal heroes in the cosplay world, people who whose videos you maybe go to if you're looking for advice on building a certain prop or making a costume a certain way? Is there people out there that you want to give a shout out to? It's also handy if people are going into cosplay as well. Who do you recommend that they can check out just for hints and tips?
I believe my fellow judge recommended the same person yesterday, but Cosplay. She and her partner have done a plethora of things from sewing to lighting, the new cosplay props, to making the props themselves. They've worked with 3D printers, laser cutters, etc., but they do really good, not only tutorial books, but also like patterns. So if you wanted, say, like a hat pattern, they've got like a set of patterns you can just buy and then modify from there. It's a really good starting point, I feel, for a lot of costumes will be working from scratch.
We do have a question there.
Hi. Do you have any pieces that come to mind that you maybe felt sceptical about it while you were either working on it or creating it, and then afterwards you felt it came out better than you were expecting, or any surprising results from any of the work that you did?
I'd say the main time I experienced that was when I was first venturing into using resin printers. I unfortunately don't have any examples of things that I've resin printed with me today, but I was working on resin printing earring, because resin printers are really good for very fine detail things, so jewelry pieces, small gemstones. You'd much rather resin print than use FDM like I do for bigger props. And because because I was new to the process, because you have to make sure the resin is secured, different support structures to stop things passing along the ones printing. I was just a bit worried, like, would my pieces for this earring fit together, kind of thing. And with a little bit of sanding, they did eventually go and went painted. Fantastic, and I was very happy with it.
Any more questions for me on anything now? Oh, yes, we have one here. So you doing that strong, hang on.
Hello. I was just wondering, would you have any advice for people getting into cosplay that have absolutely no electronics experience? Would you recommend for people to have a course or a class or something like that?
Cosplay has a book on electronics, and I believe that's like from the ground up, so we like explained how you're supposed to connect things together, what not to do, sort of thing. Generally, a lot of it, like simple stuff in electronics within cosplay is using strip LEDs. Now, when you buy if you have an individual LED, you can't connect it straight to a battery because it will pop. But strip LEDs are designed to stop this because they actually have inbuilt into the strip a little resistor, and that means you can just connect that straight to the positive and negative terminals of the battery, and it'll be fine. That's what I first worked with when I was starting to learn electronics, and then through research like online, there's a lot of tutorials on the internet also for if you want to start doing like color changing parts, how you program that. There's like step-by-step guides on YouTube. That's what I followed when I was first starting to work with electronics and getting more advanced.
Any more questions from you? Yeah, yourself, yeah. Scott, you want to get that one?
Hi, do you focus solely on one character, one set of costume at a time, or do you have multiple projects on the go? And how long would it take you from the concept to the finished? How long do you give yourself in planning time for which Comic-Con or which event you'll be ready for?
I like to prepare my props as long in advance as possible. Like, I mean in months in advance, because I never know if something's going to go wrong, and I really despise the idea of Comic-Con shit. It scares me. For my props, depends how much time I have, obviously, between stuff and other life. But, for example, both the staff and the plate actually only took about a week to 3D model, and then another week of like just waiting for the printer to print it. One thing I love about 3D printing, you can just, if you have a vaguely reliable printer, you can set it going and go to sleep, and you can't wake up and the part you set up is all ready and done, and you can add it to the pile to be assembled once you've got everything printed. But yeah, so both the staff and the plate actually about a week's modeling time, a week and a bit printing time, and then often any additional time is like, how much do I want to fully paint? Do I just need to do like a little surface detail? Both of these are mainly unprinted except for that surface detail, because when you get to painting props, I find that's the time consuming thing. I spent 3 weeks sanding a prop bow that only took actually a week to print. I started to try and move away from painting things, unless it's absolutely necessary for that reason.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions. If you do think of questions throughout the day you want to ask both our cosplay guests, they'll just do a second as barrier here. In the meantime, please give a nice round of applause for Sarah Genosis.